are live. How are you doing today, Angela?
Awesome. Happy Tuesday.
Happy
Happy
Tuesday
Taco
to you as
Tuesday if you
well.
celebrate.
Indeed, you know what? A taco would sound good right about right about now. And we are recording this on Earth Day as well. So happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day. Fun fact Earth Day, many,
Uh-huh.
many years ago, I can't even remember how many. I decided, it was a challenge. Like, oh, can you give up meat for a week? It was on Earth Day.
Hmm.
And I was like, sure. I gave up meat for years. It went from a week to
Wow.
I can do this. And then I had a taste for chicken wings and it all went downhill from there. So my
Oh
Earth
man.
Day
Well, I mean, if you did that, yeah, for years, I think you were good. You were okay. To come back onto the Korean
the carnivore
side of the
side of
table. Yeah.
that's
Oh
exactly what
yeah.
I did.
You're Yeah, welcome back.
Happy to be here.
Cool, cool. Yeah, yeah, indeed. Well, today, along with chicken wings, we're talking about building serverless applications, chapter 5 of the programming AWS Lambda book, um, hashtag Java book, hashtag it is Lambda, but it's really about Java,
Hashtag
hashtag,
Java.
I don't know, hashtag sheep and wolf clothing, and so much more that we could probably add, to describe this book. But yeah, this chapter was interesting though. It kind of pulled a lot of things together that we've talked about in previous chapters. To, I mean, the examples that they gave were full like end to end applications, quote unquote,
hmm
but not what you might necessarily think of as a useful out of the box, like deploy it right away, it's good for production, everybody's going to log in type application. It's more like they were very dialed in functions, for lack of a better word,
Yes, very much
that
so.
an application could use, or that you could use to build an application around. But I still think like it touched on all the parts that you would need to have a full end-to-end application based on serverless functions.
Well, yes. So again, I agree that this chapter was kind of broken up uh, into three different examples of three different functions, and uh, there were applications, of course, they were definitely
Yeah.
applications, but because we're using serverless functions, they relied heavily on those, and then other parts of AWS infrastructure. So if you look at if you're looking in the book and you look in the table of contents, you'll see that it kind of touches on in each example. It'll touch on the infrastructure, it'll touch on deployment, it'll touch on the architecture, and it'll touch on the code, and it did that for the three
Mhm.
examples. Yeah, so where do we want to begin? Do we want to just start maybe brush up on what this chapter covers? It's uh in the beginning of the chapter, there's this synopsis of what the chapter is going to be. So let's set the stage.
Yeah.
I think we just set the stage, but um, Lambda functions, the way we were doing it in previous chapters, Lambda functions are rarely invoked directly from the code. They're usually
Yeah.
an event source that will trigger the function. So the it was almost like the warm up in the previous chapters. This is getting down to using event sources to trigger said functions. And it's usually from other AWS services. And there
Mhm.
were some examples in the book, maybe I think it was in chapter 2, where they talked about the API gateway being an event source for being an event source. And we saw that S3 was an event source in even chapter 1. So there are many
Mhm.
services directly that integrate with Lambda and integrate more directly. So this chapter digs into how to tie the event sources into Lambda.
Yeah, and one of the cool thing, well, I guess a couple cool things. One, if you're working with Lambda, you have all these event sources that you could tap into for your application. If you're uploading something to an S3 bucket, if you're mapping different functions to different functionality using API gateway, and some of the ones they listed were like Alexa skills, even
Mhm.
cloud formation, code commit, and so on and so forth. And one of the cool things, I guess the other cool thing that I was going to mention about SAM is that as you're developing, you can generate these um, sample events. So you could say, SAM, generate an event for API gateway acting as an AWS proxy. And it's
Yeah.
going to give you an example of what that event looks like. And you can say, okay, well, if this is the information that I'm getting from API gateway, this is how I can apply it to my function, or this is how I can access these particular resources or definitions in my function. So I thought that was kind of cool for SAM, the serverless application model command line interface, to have that functionality to help out developers while they're building applications.
Yes. So you can understand what the formats are. So you can do SAM local generate event. If you want to get more specific by generating an event from a particular uh, service, I think you can do SAM local generate event service. Like you can get a lot of specificity, and then even
Mm-hmm.
subservice. And then you see this little sample, and it shows you what this source looks like, and then you can kind of go from there. So SAM is actually a really helpful tool. The fact that I'd never heard of it doesn't matter that I haven't heard of it, but I wonder how prevalent it is in use. Like, are people really using this in listeners? Are people really using this when they're
Yeah, yeah.
doing
Um,
serverless
yeah,
functions?
definitely. Yeah, I'm just eager to hear if folks are using SAM. I will say, in my experience, that I have supported developers that use SAM. And one of the cool things and not so cool things about SAM, depending on which perspective you're looking at it from, whether you're the dev or the ops, is that SAM does let you create infrastructure,
Yep.
as we'll see in an example. It lets you create the API gateway. It lets you create the Dynamo DB table. As a developer, that's great because boom, you got it, right? But then if you're an operator or on the ops side and you have certain standards that you have to follow for the infrastructure that you create, and the developers are just doing whatever they want to do respectfully, then things could get out of sync very quickly. It's like, who deployed this? Who managed this? This isn't tagged correctly or whatever the case is. So yeah, that can become a problem. But if you're just like doing a proof of concept or like a solo developer or something like that, then SAM is pretty slick that way.
Yeah.
And I was just trying to talk longer because I see some comments rolling in. Shout out to Tech Coach Ralph checking in. Good afternoon and evening to you, sir. And his comment is, we use Lambdas to render lower quality videos on the fly rather than saving files in S3 that are rarely used. It saves the company lots of money. So yeah, I mean, we mentioned S3 as an event source for Lambda. Yeah, that's like classic use case for Lambda. Those functions that you can trigger, do the job, write the output, and just stop executing. You don't have to worry about it until next time.
Did you hear my dryer? Please say no.
I did. hey, hey, this is live, so
This
you're
is
gonna get what you're
so
gonna
live.
get, folks.
This is so live. Okay, so we talked about event sources. We talked about SAM being a great tool, not only to help you generate events, but to also help you build out infrastructure. Next, I guess it's understanding. You touched on it. Understanding different event source semantics. So we talked about the two
Mhm.
ways that functions can be invoked, and I think we talked about that the chapter 4, where
Yes,
thank you.
yeah, synchronously and asynchronously.
Asynchronously. And then there's
Um,
also a third way, the stream queue event source. So
yes.
examples of that is like Kinesis Data Stream and DynamoDB and SQS. So I'm assuming in those cases, Lambda reaches out to those upstream sources and paths and polls them for events.
Mhm.
So it constantly does a poll. I have never I've used SQS. I've used Dynamo. I've never used DynamoDB streams. Can you
Mm.
think of a use case where they would be helpful or useful? Like what kind of application you think we could? I'm just spitballing here. Like
Yeah,
what
definitely
would it be?
for microservices, if you want to and I'm drawing a blank on the word right now, but if you want to disconnect loosely couple your
Loosely
microservices, that's the
coupled.
word that I was looking for. So you could have some architecture that's based on microservices or even monoliths for the case. But if you don't want to send if one service can't handle traffic faster than the upstream service sends it, then that's where you want that either DynamoDB table to sit or an SQS queue to sit. And then as you're the fast service is writing all this data to DynamoDB,
Okay.
and then
Okay.
DynamoDB streaming it to the other application at the rate that it can receive it, then that's a good use for those types of queuing architectures.
Okay.
So I could see that, being an option or a use case for that. And there are like Kafka. I haven't used Kafka before, but that's like a very
Very popular.
well-known and prevalently used streaming queuing service for all types of data and media. So yeah,
All
we
right.
got options.
We got options. All right. On page 92, there is a table that lists, let me get to page 92, that lists the Lambda event source types via their, if it's asynchronous, if it's synchronous, if it's stream queue. So
Mhm.
we're going to be talking about the API gateway here in a little bit. So I'm assuming that'll be a synchronous event type,
Yes.
event source type. I think Mike has a nice little demo he's going to show us. And if we go a little bit further on page 92, it shows an example of building a serverless API. Oh my
Yes,
gosh,
indeed. Let me get my
Johnny on the
screen
spot.
cleared up because I already got that ready to go.
Okay, now I love that. Okay, so in chapter
Yeah,
one, there was an example that how Lambda could be part of a web API, and this I'm assuming is the one they brought it into chapter 5, but I think we saw it in chapter 1 as well. This application allows a client to upload weather data into to an API, and then allows other clients to retrieve the data from the DynamoDB database. So that is this little diagram, and this is what it's going to do. Is your example going to be anything like this?
My example is based entirely on this diagram.
What? Okay.
And yeah, the authors, I mean, they were kind enough to offer the code to, the
Java.
reader to say, hey, if you want to implement this, this is the code. But yes, it is in Java.
It is.
And listeners and friends, we have no quarrel, no problem with Java developers. Really, it's on us, right? Because we are not Java developers. So we have to take, whatever approach or stance we can to, learn the concepts, the Lambda concepts from this book, along with the approach that the authors use, which is using Java to translate those concepts. So my approach to solving this particular exercise was to take the code that the authors provided and translate it into Python. So we're not going to be reviewing Java code in my example. It's baking in the oven right now. It'll be ready in just a minute. But I did translate it to Python. And if you caught the sneak preview hidden episode last week, this is actually take 2 of season 2, episode 5. In last week's sort of hidden or missing episode, I talked about how I use Cursor AI to translate the Java code into Python. So that's the code that I work with to implement this particular architecture.
Fantastic. So there's also, so in this diagram, it's the user accesses the gateway, triggers that Lambda function, writes to the database, and retrieves the information from the database. This is I'm going to assume it's an HTTP API gateway. It's not, it could, no, actually, I take it back. In the book, it said that all examples were going to use the REST API gateway, which is representational state transfer. And that's the one that's super feature rich. It has built-in security. It has rate limiting, request and response mapping. But there is a next tier down in AWS called HTTP API gateway, and it has fewer features. It's cheaper to use. It's great for exposing Lambda functions to the internet with a lot less complexity. There's also
Mhm.
a newer that they didn't mention in the book because, as we said, this book is a few years old, but AWS has come out with the WebSocket API gateway. And to maintain that
Mhm.
persistent connection between clients and like for messaging and chat and things like that. And depending on the app, it works very well with the HTTP API gateway. So there are three flavors. And I think your example is going to use the REST API.
It does.
It does.
And the key, yeah, the key reasoning behind that is, I mean, we're talking about applications and the way that you can use API gateway is sort of the, uh, and this is an Azure term, but the front door to your application.
Front door.
This API gateway is going to map routes from your URL, for lack of a better term, to a specific function. So in this particular example, we're going to have two routes. One is location and one is query.
Okay.
And the location API, or actually I should start with the query. No, yeah. Location API is used to write data to a specific location, and the query API is used to get that data back.
Okay.
You mentioned security. My implementation has zero security. It's like anybody could get to this API if they wanted to write to this DynamoDB table, which is why I'm going to completely tear it down after I demonstrate it here for you all who are joining us live.
Awesome.
But yeah, you write, one route you write to the database, and then another route you read from it. But the endpoint, the front door, is the same. It just depends on like which path you're taking after you get through
Gotcha.
the front door.
Okay. Do you make a left or do
So I
you
mean,
make a
without
right?
right, and I wish they had labeled it on this chart. Like the way that this chart looks is like either application can do either function, because the flow of traffic that they're showing, they have double-ended arrows
That's
to
true.
either function from API gateway all the way to DynamoDB. And it's not really the case, right? Because the location function is only going one
One
way
way.
from API
Yeah.
gateway to DynamoDB, and it writes the data. And then
And
that location
comes back.
function is actually reading from DynamoDB and going back out. But maybe they're showing like the request path, or trying to represent that, or whatever the case is. But yeah, I don't think it's telling the exact truth for the way this architecture is laid out.
Okay.
Just they're just trying to give you an idea what it looks like.
Okay. So what
Yeah.
let's see. Where am I in my notes? We talked about the flavors of API gateways. Um let's see. What else? Since we're not
Well,
talking
and while you're going,
yeah,
no, go ahead, go ahead.
because we're not your example is not Java. I will not talk about POJOs because
Yeah,
in their example, that's what they're using for
yeah,
serialization and deserialization. We're not going to get into that. Read chapter 5 if you want more on that. Let's see what else. Yeah, there's a lot in this chapter. And if you're
yeah,
interested in seeing Mike's example specifically, check out the GitHub repo. The link is on the screen, github.com/cover to code season 2, blah, blah, blah. Check it out. What's the book? Hey,
yeah. And
Jeffson, how you doing? Here we go. Programming AWS Lambda. Okay, it says AWS Lambda, but this is a Java book
yeah,
basically showing you how to use Java with Lambda. And what Michael's doing is he's like, nah, and I'm going to write it in Python, the language I know, and try to get through the same type of examples. So yes, if you're a Java programmer, this is your bag right here. If you're
yeah.
not, I'm curious if there is something else comparable for Python's much easier. Yes, Prince Marky D, I agree with you. We both are in concert. We have a Pythonista. We have Michael here, our resident Pythonista. He has definitely told us that, and I've programmed in Python in the past. Much easier, much easier.
Yeah.
So yeah, Jepson, I know you know Python, so you might be able to jump in on this and check out the repo. Okay, all right.
Yeah, indeed. Definitely check out that repo. And thank you for that little break, because I have since gotten my screen
I know.
squared away. And we're all set to go through this demo here.
Awesome
So
sauce.
again, this is the demonstration that's showing the API gateway application that's writing data. One route writes data to DynamoDB, and another route reads it back, right? So this is the template, SAM template. It looks a lot like CloudFormation. Defines the API, the resources, the DynamoDB table. I got two functions in here. One's for the locations table. It's called. It writes to the table, and then the weather event or weather query lambda, rather, weather event lambda writes it, weather query lambda reads it. Yeah, so the definitions is pretty straightforward, when it comes to the template itself. And the resources that you get out of here are actually, let me go to the outputs because there's a lot of junk in there. You get this API endpoint, which is an API gateway. Of course, you get the DynamoDB table where the data is stored. And then you get these endpoints, which are tied directly to a function. Now, executing these functions directly, with the exception of the, I forget which one it is, the one that actually, yeah, the query, this one will give me some information. We'll see that in a minute. The post, when I'm actually writing data, it's a post. So I have to curl-x post to actually write data there. But let's look at the code. Yes, this is Python. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger.
Oh, that is much better. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, no problem. No problem. And I could even make it a little bit bigger than that. This one is the query function. It uses the Boto3 library. I pass an environment variable where the locations table is. That's the path that it uses. And then, like we talked about, the events that get passed in, it gets this event from API Gateway that has all the information. I'm using a class called weather event, and that's part of the information that gets passed in, particularly the location name, the temperature, the time that this information is being written, and the longitude and latitude of the location that the temperature data is being attributed to. And so kind of manipulate that data a little bit. And this one, so this is the query. So this is me reading it back. So I'm connecting to DynamoDB. I'm looking for the connection string, and it's table scan right here. Scanning tables and getting the items back, and then parsing it for the information. So it's reading everything back out of this table. I'm not limiting it to one particular thing. This function, on the other hand, which is the weather event, this writes data to the actual DynamoDB. It uses the same class to get the location, temperature, time stamp, longitude, latitude, or from the event information, which is passed in as a dictionary of strings. And then it status code 200 again. Where are these query? They are, yeah, the query. I know there's my DynamoDB table location table. Oh, table put item does right there in front of my face. Yeah, so then we're putting this item into the database itself. So that's sort of like the back end, right? So then you got to get to this front end, the front door of the application, right? And you have these routes that are events, which is a post, or locations, which is a get. So the post, again, it takes a little bit more stuff, I guess, to post data. You have to format the data a certain way. You have to tell curl or whatever process. I use the Python request library actually to post it. You got to do a little bit more than just reading it back, right? So I actually wrote a script with a whole bunch of location data that says, hey, for this particular location, and let me make this bigger too so you guys can see this. Okay. For Amsterdam, this latitude, longitude, these are the locations that we're going to write to. And I got a whole bunch of them there just to get some random data, right? And then I think I just randomized the temperature. I use the current time. So if you're in or if you look at this data and it's like, dude, you're in Alaska and you said it's 85 degrees. It's because I'm just using random data for the sake of this discussion. Okay. It's all good, right? So then I make a connection to the database right here and post the information for each location that I have. And, do some processing after that, make sure that the post was successful. If it wasn't, then I report an error and so on and so forth. So that's kind of like my method for getting the data into the database. And then I can read it out using this just read endpoint. It's just like an HTTP endpoint. And I will even for the, I don't know, because I'm crazy, I'm just going to share this with you all. If you're watching live, you can use this endpoint, just kind of play with it, pull some of this data out, right? Open that up in your browser and, kind of hack on it, because I'm going to tear this down here in a little bit. But yeah, you just read it out and you can see I've got all this information coming back from the DynamoDB through the function. The function's pulling the data from the database and then it's sending it back to API Gateway through this HTTP interface. And I guess we did say HTTP, but through the benefit of using API Gateway, we get HTTPS for free because we got a certificate attached to the endpoint automatically. And yeah, that's kind of how it all comes together. And again, it's not a full-blown application, but you can see how maybe if this was the back end for some sort of weather widget or something like that, and you really, on the operator side, you're like, hey, I'll write this data in, or maybe you have a list of locations and then you use another API to connect to like Open Weather Database, pull that data in at a regular interval. And then as you're pulling that data in, you write it to your own database. And then from your database, you can serve that data up to all of your widgets and clients and stuff like that. So I'm happy with it.
Great example. Great example. Is anyone taking a chance in querying the locations and how about you do it? Let's see what returns if you do a get on the endpoint.
Oh, on my side?
Yeah.
Okay, give me 1 second then, because I stopped sharing. I'm going to share again, but it's going to look.
No, take your time.
It's going to look. Okay.
So what we just saw, thanks for the explanation, was actually very clear and helpful. So I'll try to paraphrase it real fast. So you went through the code, you explained that you got some random data, generated some random weather data. You basically did a put it all in the database, connect it to the database using connection stream, went through all the information, put it out there. And now what you're about to do is do a get on the endpoint. And will it retrieve random locations?
I think that would be another feature that you would have to write in your API gateway and your function, because right now it's just saying, give me all the locations that are in the database. So you would have to write you'd have to update your query function to accept a special query event, like to actually read the data behind a query string or something like that. And so then you could say, give me Buenos Aires. And then it would still scan the table.
Right.
It's going to scan the table, find the entry that matches Buenos Aires, and then it's going to return just that particular one. But yeah, right now it will not do that.
Okay.
Let's see.
This is just a learning exercise anyway. So we're not holding
no doubt
to anything. We're not holding you to anything, especially because he's the only one doing the coding. The coding examples, not from the book, but taking them and turning them into something usable in Python. Okay, let's see.
Yeah. Well, I got to get back to my URL, which is here. And then if I go here, I can just curl this guy. That's the endpoint, right? Bam. And I get the data back. It's not pretty because it's just pulling straight JSON back. But I could, let's see if I clear the screen. I can pipe it. I don't know if I have JQ installed on this system. No, it messed that up. I'm going to try one more thing. If not, I got something else for it. I can try to pipe it to python-m json.tool. Python, let's try Python 3. Python 3. Okay, that cleans it up quite a bit. Yeah. So yeah, it's the same thing as in the browser. It's just like the way that you would do it from your system here, or from your, your local terminal, or from some other application using a different library.
Wonderful. That was a very great example. So this is chapter 5 of programming AWS Lambda. This chapter was called Building Serverless Applications, and this was a really great example of building the code out, using SAM, the SAM tool, to build out the infrastructure, the database. What else was there? There were other
The
things.
API gateway,
API gateway.
functions.
And so yeah, it shows you how to build out the architecture. We explained the behavior of the application, where you're doing a putting all the information in, you're querying the endpoint, it dumps back all the information back out. And I think this was a really good example, not using Java, but using a lot of the tooling mentioned, like SAM, and using the console to show you the back end. So I think that was really cool.
Yes,
And he
indeed.
mentioned that he used Cursor AI as the tool
Yeah.
to help him build the code translated from Java into Python speak, which I think is really cool. Has anyone else who's listening had an opportunity to use Cursor AI? I just read a blog post about it.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, okay, this is what Mike was talking about. And I can't remember the example, but it rang that bell because you mentioned it in our hidden
Yeah.
meet last week. So I was like, why didn't I think of that? But yeah, that's Johnny on the spot. So it doesn't
Yeah, indeed.
preclude you from using a book like this.
Exactly. And there are so many what I would call agentic IDEs out there, that you don't have to use Cursor. Even Visual Studio Code now, with Microsoft Copilot and GitHub Copilot, I think you can, even the GitHub Copilot, I think you could tap into it for free or
We're
next
free
to
now.
nothing.
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, there are so many tools and capabilities that we could tap into to help us work with code better. And you may have heard it in other places, but I'll say it again. AI is not going to take your job. Somebody that knows how to use AI will definitely take your job.
You
So
heard that right.
just get out there, yeah, learn how to use these agentic editors, learn how to use, I mean, MCPs is the next big thing, model context protocols. I'm
Mhm.
still learning that one. But yeah, there's a lot of good stuff out there that can help you with
Awesome.
figuring out what a code base does, and God forbid you have to stay in that code base. But if you can get out of it, then hey, ask the AI to translate it for you.
Sweet. So that was chapter
Yeah.
5. And next week we'll
Yes,
be
indeed.
on 6 and 7. How about that? We're going to be talking
Yeah,
about
2 chapters in 1 episode.
so we'll be speaking very fast. This is our normal
I
pace of
know.
speaking. Next week we're going to be like Twister. It's just going to be so much. We
Yeah,
will
yeah,
not
we
be
got to get
doing
caught
that.
up now.
We will not be doing that. But
Yeah.
chapter 6 is testing. We'll look at testing applications using the SAM tool. I think that's still a big part of these examples. We'll look at various ways to watch the logs for your testing, and then we'll go into chapter 7, logging, metrics, and tracing. So yeah, we'll be
Yeah.
using more AWS tooling in the next
Yeah.
week's gathering. So we'll see a little bit more. We'll be moving around out of Lambda into other services. So this is pretty cool. What do you think?
No, I totally agree on moving out of Lambda into other services, because when you talk about, well, testing, I imagine the testing will be like locally, just testing your functions before you actually deploy them. And for logging, metrics, and tracing, you're definitely going to CloudWatch. I mean, no
Yep.
spoilers given there. And that's one of the crazy things that's tough about Lambda, because it's not like running your code locally, right? You're like, hey, where'd that log go? Where's my output go? How do I know how many times my function's been called, et cetera, et cetera? And CloudWatch is going to give you a lot of that information.
Fantastic. Well, that is another from Cover to Code book club meeting in the books. I want to
Indeed.
thank Tech Coach Ralph, Prince Marky D, Jepson, anyone else watching us, wherever you're watching us, LinkedIn, Twitter. Thank you so much for checking in. And yeah, check out our repo, watch our replays on YouTube, and we will see you next week.
We will see you next time. Thanks for joining us live, folks, and we'll see you on the replay.
Bye.